From the concession tent, two off-duty officers watched a man in a suit, 30 years out of fashion, stand very still at the edge of the cordage field, and neither of them had said a word about him yet that was kind. "He's been standing there since before we opened the gate," the first said, nodding toward the folding chairs and the bunting strung along the memorial bench. "Just standing, holding something against his side like it might walk off." "Some kind of case," the second said. "Leather. He won't set it down. I watched him turn away a kid who tried to touch it. Didn't yell. Didn't even really move fast. Just turned his whole body like a door swinging shut." 7 dogs would work that field before the day was through. 7, certified and decorated, representing 30 years of a bloodline neither officer could have named the start of if their pensions depended on it. A news van idled in the gravel lot with its call letters catching the noon sun. Somewhere across town, at 4 o'clock sharp, Chief Grady Hollis was scheduled to put his signature on a contract that would hand the department's entire training program to an outside vendor, and every soul on that field, except one old man in a pressed, dated suit, believed that signature was a formality. "Cadwallader's spotted him," the first officer said. Officer Tanner Cadwallader crossed the grass with the clipped, purposeful walk of a man who had rehearsed his own posture. Laminated run sheet in hand, wristwatch checked twice in 10 strides. He stopped in front of the old man and said something short. The old man did not step back. He did not raise his voice either. From the tent, they couldn't hear a word of it, only watched Cadwallader's hand come up, palm out, then swing toward the parking lot in the universal shape of a... "He's telling him to leave," the second officer said, disbelieving, before the things even started. "Man's not bothering anybody, just standing by a bench. Tell that to Tanner. Per the program, per the program, per the..." He didn't finish. He was already reaching for his coffee, already looking away, the way a man looks away from something that isn't his business yet. If you have ever watched somebody decide, in the first 4 seconds of meeting a person, that they already know the whole of him, watch for the word notch. Today, it will matter more than either of these officers understood, standing there with their coffee going lukewarm, more than the 7 dogs about to be walked onto that field, more than the contract waiting to be signed at 4 o'clock in an office none of them would ever see. Somewhere on a strip of scarred leather, held flat against an old man's ribs, there were marks cut with an awl that no laminated sheet, no vendor's pedigree, no rehearsed hand gesture could explain. Not yet. The morning was still deciding what kind of day it would turn out to be, and the man at the center of it hadn't so much as raised his eyes toward the crowd gathering behind him. The suit was navy, cut for shoulders that had since narrowed, the lapels a width nobody had tailored in 3 decades, and it had been brushed that morning with the kind of care usually reserved for church. His right arm did not lift past the height of his own chest, hadn't in years, and so when he needed to gesture, he did it with a flat turn of the wrist instead, economical, like a man closing a gate rather than waving one open. He wore no coat, despite the morning's chill, as though the suit itself were meant to be sufficient, meant to say something on its own that he had no further use for saying aloud. The sleeve rode against his side the whole walk-in from the gravel lot, leather, dark with age at the seams, stitched by a hand that had clearly known exactly what it was doing, and along one long edge, a row of small notches cut close together, dozens of them, filed down soft by years of thumbs passing over them without thinking. Wilbur Etheridge held it the way another man might hold a folded flag, not gripping it so much as keeping it near, and when a boy of maybe 9 ran past and reached for the strange, scarred thing out of pure curiosity, Wilbur turned his whole body a quarter turn, unhurried, and the boy's hand closed on air instead. He crossed to the memorial bench first, before the folding chairs filled, before the tent flaps went up on the concession stand. The bench sat under a young maple with a plaque, bolted to its slats, listing the department's K-9 dead by name and year. More names now than the bench had room to hold gracefully. Wilbur set the sleeve down flat across his knees, not on the bench itself, and sat beside the plaque for exactly as long as it took him to say something under his breath that no one else was close enough to catch. Then he laid 2 fingers on the bench's arm, briefly, the way a man touches a mailbox on his way past a house he no longer lives in. It was a small thing, and it took perhaps 90 seconds, and if anyone had asked him what he was doing there before the ceremony even opened its gates, he would have told them, in the fewest words available, that he was early. He would not have told them that this was the 11th spring he had done exactly this, alone, at exactly this hour, at every ceremony the department had held since Eleanor died, that the maple had been a sapling the first year he'd sat beside it, and that he had chosen this bench over the reception line every single time because a woman he had loved for 40 years was folded into the reason this program existed at all, and no plaque anywhere said her name, and none needed to. He came, he sat, he touched the wood, and then he rose and carried the sleeve back to his hip and waited at the edge of the field like any other stranger who had wandered in off the road. He was still holding it that way, flat against his ribs, both hands loosely cradling its weight without gripping, when Cadwallader's shadow fell across him a second time. By the time the folding chairs had filled and the news crew had set their tripod at the good angled so the memorial bench sat handsomely behind whoever spoke, Officer Tanner Cadwallader had found his rhythm. He moved along the sideline in his creased department polo, laminated run sheet tucked under one arm, greeting sponsors by name, throwing a joke to the reporter that made her laugh, with her hand half covering her mouth, checking his wristwatch on a schedule only he seemed to be keeping. He was, by any measure that mattered to the people paying him, exactly where he wanted to be, the face of the ceremony, the man who would stand at the podium in 20 minutes and use the words legacy and excellence in the same sentence, the man whose new vendor contract, if the afternoon went the way he'd built it to go, would carry his name into every training manual printed after this year. He found the old man again near the rope line, still holding that scarred leather case against his side, and something about the stillness of him, the flat, unbothered way he watched the field being set, pulled Cadwallader off his rhythm for exactly as long as it took to cross the distance between them. "Sir," he said, loud enough that 3 or 4 heads nearby turned, "you don't belong here, old man. This is a working ceremony, not a place to rest." A ripple of laughter went through the folding chairs closest to them, quick and easy, the kind of laugh a crowd gives when it has been handed permission to laugh by someone standing at a podium. Cadwallader smiled at the sound of it, glanced toward the news camera to see if it had caught him being sharp and funny at once, and straightened the laminated sheet under his arm as though it had just been proven correct about something. "There's a public viewing area," he went on, warmer now that the room had sided with him, back past the concession tent. "Plenty of folks watch from there every year, grandparents mostly." He said the word with a little indulgent tilt of the head, as if he were doing the old man a kindness by naming exactly which category he belonged in. Wilbur did not answer. He did not sit down, and he did not walk away either. He shifted his weight so that his bad shoulder faced slightly out of the wind, and he kept both hands where they had been, holding the sleeve the way he'd been holding it since before the gates opened, and he watched Cadwallader with an attention that had nothing performed in it at all. 20 feet down the rope line, Sloane Brackett stood at parade rest, with Dune sitting sharp and steady at her left knee, waiting for her turn to walk the certification course, and she watched the whole exchange without moving her feet. Dune's ears had come up the moment the old man's silhouette passed close to the rope, a small thing, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't already watching a 3-year-old Malinois for every twitch that might cost him his certification today. Sloane had been watching for exactly that reason. She filed it without understanding it, the way you file the smell of ozone before a storm you can't yet see. "You want me to walk him out?" muttered the officer beside her, one of the 2 who'd been at the concession tent earlier, close enough now to have followed Cadwallader over out of simple curiosity. "For standing there?" Sloane said, low, not quite a challenge and not quite agreement either. "He's not on the field. He's not touching anything but that case." Dune's ears had settled again, but her hand stayed loose and ready on the leash, a habit from 100 small moments that had taught her nothing about dogs was ever really nothing. Cadwallader, unaware of the small current running along his own rope line, straightened his shoulders for the camera one more time, and let the moment close on a note he clearly believed was generous. "Courtesy seating, then," he said, waving a hand toward the last row of folding chairs at the field's far edge, the ones angled away from the podium, the ones nobody competed for. "You can sit there. Just don't wander onto the grass once the dogs are working. For your own safety, sir, and theirs," he said. "Sir." The way a man says it when the word is meant to close a conversation rather than open one, and he turned back toward the podium without waiting to see whether the old man moved. Wilbur moved. He walked to the last row, sat, and set the sleeve across his knees, exactly as he had set it across them on the bench an hour before, and if anyone in that crowd had looked closely, they would have seen that his eyes had already left Cadwallader entirely and gone to the field itself, to the 7 handlers lining up their dogs at the starting cones, reading the whole shape of it, the way another man reads a familiar room in the dark. The folding chair had been set at an angle that put the sun in his eyes for the first 20 minutes, and Wilbur did not adjust it. He sat with the sleeve flat across his knees, both hands resting on top of it rather than gripping, and watched the field the way a man watches weather come in from a long way off. No urgency in it, only attention. The certification course ran a simple pattern: a search box, an obedience heel, a controlled approach, and the bite work lane last, where each dog would take the padded sleeve on command and release clean on the second command, the release being the part that separated a trained animal from a dangerous one. 6 dogs ran it without much drama. Sloan and Dune ran 5th. Dune took the search box fast and clean, nose working the false compartments in under a minute, and he heeled through the obedience pattern like he'd been born knowing it. But at the bite work lane, on the controlled approach, he hesitated 2 full strides before the decoy's sleeve, ears back, weight shifted onto his haunches, as if the ground itself had changed under him, and when he finally did take the bite, it was shallow, off-center, gone almost before it began. Cadwallader, working the scoring sheet from his spot near the cones, made a small definitive mark and said, loud enough for the row of folding chairs to hear, "There it is. Same fault as last month. Some dogs just don't have the nerve for it. No shame in that. But it is what it is." He tapped his pen against the laminate twice, satisfied, the sound of a man closing a file. Sloane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as she walked Dune off the lane, and from the last row of chairs, Wilbur watched the whole sequence again in his mind, the way he might replay a piece of music to catch the note that had gone wrong. It was not nerve. He had seen nerve 1,000 times, and this was not the shape of it. The hitch came a half second before the decoy raised the sleeve, not after. Meaning the dog wasn't flinching from the bite, he was flinching from something in the approach itself, some cue given a beat too early or too hard, some tell in the decoy's own stance that no laminated sheet had a box to check for. Cadwallader, catching him watching, called over with the easy contempt of a man who has already decided the conversation is beneath him. "Something to add, old-timer? You look like you've got an opinion forming." The chairs nearby went quiet in that particular way. A crowd goes quiet when it senses free entertainment. Wilbur held the sleeve a little closer against his knee, and when he answered it was not loud, and it did not reach for the laughter the way Cadwallader's question had. "You're scoring the dog," Wilbur said. "The fault's in the handler's approach." It landed flat, 3 sentences shorter than anyone expected, and it did not sound like an insult, which was somehow worse for Cadwallader than if it had. He opened his mouth to answer, found the laminated sheet suddenly less useful in his hand than it had been a moment before, and settled for a short laugh aimed at the camera instead of at Wilbur, the kind of laugh a man uses to paper over a beat he didn't see coming. Sloane, 20 feet away, with Dune sitting stiff and unsettled at her knee, had heard every word of it, and something in her chest tightened that had nothing to do with the score she'd just been handed. The demonstration moved on to the 6th dog, then circled back. A formality, Cadwallader announced to the crowd, a chance to let the 7th and final team, Sloane and Dune, take one more pass at the lane before the scores were locked for the afternoon's paperwork. He said it mostly for the camera. He had already written what he believed the outcome would be. Wilbur stood, It cost him something to do it. The chair scraped. His right shoulder hitched as he shifted his weight forward off his heels rather than pushing up through the arm. But he was on his feet before anyone thought to stop him, sleeve held now not against his ribs but low at his side. And he walked to the rope line at the edge of the grass with the unhurried economy of a man who has made this exact walk 10,000 times before in places nobody here had ever heard of. "Sir, you need to stay behind the—" Cadwallader started, already moving to intercept. But Wilbur had already stopped walking. He stood at the rope, faced the field, and raised his right hand only as far as his shoulder would allow, which was not far at all, and turned his wrist flat, palm down, fingers loose, a small, economical gesture, nothing like a command, nothing like anything in Cadwallader's laminated sheet of approved hand signals. 7 dogs broke formation at once. Dune came first, mid-stride in the bite-work lane, Decoy's sleeve still raised and forgotten, breaking off the approach so cleanly that the decoy staggered a half-step forward into empty air. Behind him, the search box dog abandoned a compartment she hadn't finished clearing. The obedience heel dog peeled off his handler's left side, without so much as a backward glance at the command being shouted after him. One by one, in an order that had nothing to do with proximity or seniority or which handler shouted loudest, all 7 dogs crossed the trampled grass at a dead run and arranged themselves in a loose, quiet half-circle at Wilbur's feet, sitting, every one of them, without being told to sit, tails still, eyes up, waiting. The field went silent in the particular way a crowded place goes silent when something has happened that nobody present has language for yet. Somewhere behind the rope line, a handler was still calling a name that no longer meant anything to the dog it belonged to. The news camera, which had been trained on Cadwallader's face for a scripted line about excellence, swung hard left and found instead an old man in a suit, 30 years out of cut, standing with his hand still raised no higher than his own collarbone, 7 of the department's working dogs arranged around him like points on a compass he hadn't asked to be the center of. Cadwallader's mouth was open. No sound had come out of it yet. Sloane stood at the empty spot where Dune had been a half-second before, leash slack in her hand, and looked not at the dogs, but at Wilbur's face for the first time all day. Really looked, and felt something shift into place that she could not yet have named if someone had asked her to. Wilbur lowered his hand. He did not smile, did not step forward to touch any of the animals gathered at his feet, did not so much as look particularly surprised by what had just happened, which was in its own way the strangest thing of all. He simply stood there, sleeve still held at his side, in a silence that had become, in the space of 4 seconds, the loudest thing anyone on that field had heard all year. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman's voice broke the quiet with a single word. Not a name, not a question, just "Notch," said to the man beside her, pointing at the scarred leather case still hanging from the old man's hand, as if she had only now understood that whatever was cut into that seam might be the only explanation anybody was going to get for what they had just watched. Cadwallader found his voice before anyone else did, and what came out of it was louder than it needed to be, the particular volume of a man trying to outshout his own confusion. "Recall them," he said, snapping his fingers toward the handlers still frozen along the rope line. "Recall your animals, now. This isn't part of the program." He turned on Wilbur, with the laminated run sheet raised like a citation about to be issued. "Whatever that was, it's over. Sir, I need that case." He nodded at the sleeve. "If you've got some kind of scented lure in there, some training aid you brought onto a certified field without clearance, that's a violation, and it just cost this department's whole afternoon of scoring. Dune's certification is void, as of right now. I don't have a choice." "There's no lure in it," Sloane said, before she had fully decided to say anything at all. Her voice carried further than she meant it to. "I've handled that dog every day for a year. He didn't smell his way over there. He looked." "That's not your call to make," Cadwallader said. Not unkindly exactly, but with the particular hardness of a man watching his own afternoon come apart at the seams in front of a camera he'd invited himself. He turned back to Wilbur. "I'm going to need you to hand over the case, sir, and I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out. Chief Hollis isn't here to weigh in, and I've got a contract signing scheduled the second this ceremony wraps. I don't have time for a mystery." Wilbur's hand tightened, barely, on the sleeve's worn strap. "It stays with me," he said. 3 words, no more offered. "Then you're both coming with me," Cadwallader said, and reached for an officer's arm at the rope line, already composing, in his head, the shape of the incident report he would need to file by end of day. It was Sloane who stepped between them, not shouting, not defiant exactly, just present, her body between Cadwallader's reaching hand and the old man's sleeve in a way that put her own name on whatever happened next. "Chief Hollis is 15 minutes out," she said. "I just got the update on the radio. He asked that nothing on this field be decided before he arrives." It wasn't quite true yet. The update had said 30 minutes, maybe more. Traffic backed up past the county line, but she said it steady enough that Cadwallader hesitated, wristwatch coming up automatically to check against a deadline that was in fact closing on all of them at once, the 4 o'clock signing sliding closer with every second spent standing on this grass arguing about a dog certification. Behind her, Dune had not moved from his place in the loose half-circle at Wilbur's feet, and neither had the other 6. The chief's actual arrival time, when the dispatcher finally confirmed it over the radio clipped to Sloane's shoulder, was worse than either of them had let show on their faces. Delayed past 3:30, a wreck backed up on the interstate spur, no clear estimate before 4. Which meant the contract with Director Prescott Merivale's company, the one Cadwallader had spent 8 months building toward, the one that would install Merivale's evaluation method as the department's standard and Cadwallader's own name as its internal champion, was going to sit on the chief's desk with nobody but a deputy clerk in the building to witness whether it got signed sight unseen or not at all. Cadwallader looked at that fact land on him, the way a man looks at weather he has no way to outrun, and something in his jaw set harder than it had all morning. "Fine," he said. "Nobody's leaving the field, and nobody's touching that case until the chief gets here to sort it. But I want it understood." He pointed the laminated sheet at Wilbur without quite meeting his eyes, that whatever just happened out there doesn't change what the paperwork says about this program's history. That's not up for a vote from 7 confused dogs. It was the word paperwork that caught, oddly, in Sloane's ear, the way a burr catches in a sock, small and not going away. Cadwallader called for the ledger himself, which surprised Sloane more than almost anything else that had happened that morning. She had expected him to stall, to talk past the moment, to lean on procedure, until Chief Hollis's arrival made the whole argument academic. Instead, he strode to the folding table by the podium, retrieved a slim, cloth-bound book from beneath a stack of programs printed with the department's crest, and carried it back to the rope line like a man producing his strongest evidence. "You want to talk legacy," he said, opening it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "This is legacy. This is the department's actual training lineage, kept since the program started, and it's exactly why Merivale's method is the right fit going forward. His mentor's the name in this book, not some story a bunch of spooked dogs decided to tell us." He turned the ledger so the nearest chairs could see, tapping a line of careful copperplate handwriting near the top of the page. "Founding trainer, right there. It's not up for interpretation." Sloane leaned in before she'd thought better of it, close enough to read the entry herself, and it was the ink that stopped her, not the name. The rest of the page had faded to the soft brown of 30-year-old iron gall, uniform across every line, but the founding entry sat darker, blacker, the letters pitched at a slightly steeper slant than the handwriting around it, as if written by the same hand years later, or by a different hand entirely trying to match it. "That entry's not the same age as the rest of the page," she said. "It's a ledger, not a painting," Cadwallader said, but his eyes had gone to it too now, and he did not sound as certain saying it the second time. Wilbur had not moved from where he stood, sleeve still at his side, 7 dogs still arranged in their patient half-circle around his shoes, but his gaze had gone to that page the moment it opened, and something in his face, not surprise, something quieter and older than surprise, settled into place. "That's not Merivale's mentor's hand," he said. "That's a copy of it. Badly." "You don't know that," Cadwallader said, though the words came out thinner than he meant them to. "I know the year," Wilbur said. He nodded, once, toward the leather sleeve still hanging from his own hand, toward the row of small notches cut along its seam that no manufactured sleeve had ever carried. "First notch on this is cut the same spring as that entry. I ought to know it. I cut it." The field went quiet again, differently this time, not the stunned silence of 7 dogs breaking formation, but the held, careful quiet of a crowd realizing a story is turning out to be longer than the one they were told to expect. Sloane looked from the ledger to the sleeve and back, and understood, with a small cold drop in her stomach, that whatever had been altered on that page had not been altered by accident, and that the man standing at the rope line in a suit 30 years out of cut had just told them, in the fewest possible words, exactly whose year it actually was. Chief Grady Hollis arrived on foot from the parking lot at 9 minutes to 4, jacket half-buttoned, having left his own car running behind the gate rather than lose the time it would take to park it properly, and he crossed the last 30 yards of grass at a pace that made the whole rope line straighten without being told to. He saw the ledger open on the table first, then he saw Wilbur. He stopped walking, not slowly, not the graceful deceleration of a man arriving somewhere important. He simply stopped, mid-stride, the way a man stops when the ground in front of him has changed. For 3 full seconds he said nothing at all, and in that silence, Cadwallader, still holding the laminated sheet, found himself with no procedure to reach for. "Chief," Cadwallader started, "we've had an incident with the certification scoring, and there's a question about—" Hollis did not look at him. He crossed the remaining distance to Wilbur, stopped in front of him, and reached up with both hands to take off his own uniform cap. Not a salute, nothing so formal, just the plain, unhurried act of a man removing his hat in front of someone he does not feel entitled to wear it in front of, and he held it against his chest, the way you'd hold it at a graveside. "You trained my first dog," Hollis said. His voice had gone low, private, though every person on that field could hear it. 32 years ago, rookie handler, green as grass, and you're the one who taught me the release command that kept my hand attached to my arm on a call I still think about more nights than I don't." He turned the ledger toward himself without asking, ran a thumb along the darker ink of the founding entry, and something in his face went very carefully still. "This isn't Merivale's mentor's hand. I've seen his hand. I trained under men who trained under him." He looked up. "This was written over something." "It was written over me," Wilbur said. He said it plainly, without weight added to it, the way he might have reported a training score decades ago. Then, because the field was quiet enough now to hold more than 3 sentences, he said the rest of it, slower, in a voice that had not raised itself once all day, and did not raise itself now. "I founded this program the spring my daughter didn't make it home from the hospital," he said. "Eleanor and I didn't have anywhere to put what that spring was, so I put it into dogs, into teaching them to find people before it was too late for somebody else's family, the way it was too late for ours. I cut the first notch into this sleeve the week we started, so I'd never correct an animal harder than the fault called for. Every dog I trained after that carries a piece of that method, whether the ledger says my name or not. 7 dogs on this field this morning ran to a hand signal I haven't taught anybody in 36 years, because it never left the bloodline. You can erase a name from a book, you can't erase it from what the dogs already know." Nobody in the crowd laughed now, and nobody reached for a phone to film it, though the news camera had long since found him and held. Cadwallader stood with the laminated sheet still in his hand, looking at the ledger, at the ink that did not match its own page, at the old man he had ordered off this field twice before lunch, and something in his own certainty finally gave way under a weight it had never been built to carry. "I put Merivale's contract in front of you for signature this afternoon," he said to Hollis, quiet now, all the performance gone out of his voice entirely. "I built my whole recommendation on that page." He closed the ledger himself. "I'm pulling it. Whatever this program's real lineage is, it isn't for sale, and I was about to sell it without knowing what I was selling." By the second week of autumn, The department's training lineage ledger carried a new page bound in beside the old one, typed and witnessed, restoring Wilbur Etheridge's name to the year it had always belonged to, and Director Prescott Merivale's contract sat unsigned in a drawer that nobody had reason to open again. Chief Hollis saw to the correction personally, and to a smaller thing besides, quieter than any press release, a standing invitation, honored every year since, for Wilbur to sit wherever on that field he chose, no rope line between him and the grass. Officer Tanner Cadwallader kept his job. He kept, too, a different habit than the one he'd carried into that spring. He no longer opened a scoring sheet on a dog before he'd walked the handler's own approach, twice first, out loud, checking his own feet before he checked the animal's nerve. Months later, past the last warm evening of the season, Wilbur backed his truck along the tree line above Cordage Field and let the tailgate down slow, the way he did most Sundays now, with Barley riding loose in the bed beside him rather than penned, 13 years old and unhurried about every motion he made. The memorial bench sat visible across the grass in the last of the light, its new plaque catching a little gold along one edge, though Wilbur had stopped needing to sit beside it quite so long as he once had. A record kept honestly outlasts every ledger built to bury it, and no contract ever signed has yet replaced the plain, unwitnessed truth of a dog that remembers a hand. He sat on the tailgate with the leather sleeve resting on the boards beside him, its long row of notches catching what light was left of the day, and Barley came and laid his graying head heavy across Wilbur's knee. The two of them settled into the kind of stillness that asks nothing further of the evening at all.